Breaking news at noon. Brian Kohberger pleads guilty to murdering 4 University of Idaho students.
Are you pleading guilty because you are guilty?
Yes.
What comes next for Kohberger and reaction from outside the courthouse following today's plea deal. Plus.
Stay with me. I can do this, okay? I know it hurts.
Bystanders try to help a man who later died after getting shot in the middle of the day in the middle of downtown Portland. What we know about the person who allegedly pulled the trigger. Then a big change coming to schools throughout the state of Oregon.
Research is also saying that students aren't focused on learning because of the devices that they have.
Governor Kotek flexes her executive power, banning cell phones in classrooms across the state, a ban that starts no later than the beginning of next year. KGW News at noon starts right now.
I want to make sure your plea is given voluntarily, and I want to make sure that you actually committed the crimes to which you're pleading guilty, because I don't want you to plead guilty to a crime you didn't commit. If you attempt to plead guilty today, but for some reason they don't accept your plea, then it is possible that your statements today could be used against you later at trial. Do you understand that?
Yes.
With that, Brian Kohberger pleads guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of 4 University of Idaho students in 2022. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I'm Drew Carney. Kohberger's plea started less than 2 hours ago. The hearing lasted roughly 45 minutes. We saw him today in court wearing a shirt and a tie and sitting with his defense lawyers. Family members of his victims were also present in the courtroom. Just a moment ago, we heard the judge as he made sure Kohberger understood the exact terms of his plea deal. He had to plead guilty to all 4 murder charges, and he agreed to waive all rights to appeal. By agreeing to plead guilty today, he gets a sentence of life in prison without parole, but he also gets to avoid the death penalty. The state also had a final chance to lay out details of its evidence today and recap the case against Kohberger. Then, just before 11 o'clock, he officially pled guilty.
With respect to count 1, burglary, felony, how do you plead, Mr. Kohberger, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 2, murder in the first degree, as it relates to the murder of Madison Mogan, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 3, as it relates to murder in the first degree for the murder of Kaylee Gonsalves, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 4, the first-degree murder of Xana Kernodle, a human being, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 5, the first-degree murder of Ethan Chapin, a human being, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Right. The court will find that the defendant understands the nature of the charges and each offense and the possible consequences to him of his guilty plea. The court finds that there is a factual basis for the plea and finds the defendant believes the plea to be in his best interest. I find that the plea was given freely, voluntarily, and was intelligently made. I accept the plea. I direct that it be entered. I'll continue the matter for sentencing in this
Kohberger's
case.
official sentencing is set for July 23rd. The judge said setting the date 3 weeks from now ensures family members of the victims have a chance to make impact statements. The judge did keep a gag order in place, which means the prosecution and defense couldn't speak to the media. But outside the courtroom, we heard from a family member of one of the victims who says he feels failed by state prosecutors.
You don't think 4 life sentences is justice?
No, of course not. It's daycare. Prison is daycare, people.
Steve, if you could tell the judge one thing today, what would it be?
Do what's right. Do what you know. I mean, 4 people died in their sleep. You know, if we had 4 other people that weren't college students, this would be the death penalty.
It was a bit of a different reaction from the family of one of the other victims, Maddie Mogan. They shared a statement today that read in part, "The plea deal the prosecution has proposed is one that punishes the perpetrator of this horrendous crime, protects the public from further harm, and allows all of us who knew and loved these 4 young people the time to grieve without the anxiety of the long and gruesome trials, years of appeals, and potential for mistrials along the way." So here's a recap now of the timeline in this case. It all started back on November 13th, 2022, when the 4 victims were found stabbed to death in a house just off the University of Idaho campus in Moscow. Investigators determined they had been killed just after 4 in the morning. A month later, on December 30th, the FBI took Koberger into custody at his parents' home in Pennsylvania after investigators linked his DNA to a knife sheath that was left at the crime scene. Last fall, Koberger's trial was moved from Moscow to Boise, and the trial was set to begin this August. In April of this year, the judge ruled the state could pursue the death penalty, and that ultimately led to today's plea deal. We'll have more coverage of Bryan Koberger's plea coming up in later newscasts today, starting with KGW News at 4. You can also find updates throughout the day online at KGW.com or by downloading our free streaming TV app, KGW+. Meanwhile, hundreds of people lined the streets yesterday to pay tribute to the 2 firefighters killed last weekend during an ambush in Idaho. It was part of a procession from Spokane, Washington to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho to carry their remains home. Along the way, first responders and civilians stood in salute, waved flags, and shared sentiments like this.
There's a lot of support out there, and I just hope that people don't forget that this happened today, that we remember the firefighters today who lost their lives, and that we always remember not to let hate control us and not to let these things continue to happen, because this is truly a travesty.
Battalion Chiefs John Morrison and Frank Hardwood were killed when authorities say a man started a brush fire, then opened fire at firefighters when they showed up to fight the fire. A third firefighter remains in the hospital. The gunman, meanwhile, died by suicide. Authorities have not yet released a motive. We also know the name now of the person accused of shooting and killing a man in downtown Portland yesterday afternoon. Police say 26-year-old Hassan Muse faces 2 charges, second-degree murder and unlawful use of a weapon. The shooting happened at the corner of Southwest 10th and Yamhill, right across from the Central Library. Bystanders tried to save the victim, who was left on the sidewalk. Police arrested Muse a few blocks away a few minutes later. The investigation continues into this. Anyone with information is asked to contact Portland Police. Deliberations are expected to continue this afternoon in the rape trial of former Trailblazers player Ben McLemore. We also want to remind you that some of the details in the story are graphic. This case stems from a 2021 house party in Lake Oswego. The prosecution says their client was intoxicated from a night of heavy drinking when she was raped. The defense claims that McLemore had also been drinking, but that the sex was consensual.
There's absolutely no confusion in this case. When you look at all the surrounding circumstances and you assess the evidence in this case, I submit to you that the defendant is guilty.
The only reasonable verdict in a case where 2 people get drunk and have sex and the man is drunker than the woman, the only reasonable verdict in a case like that is not guilty.
McLemore took the stand in his own defense last week and denied the rape allegations. All right, quick break from our news headlines this afternoon as we take this live look outside. Picture perfect afternoon. This is our Chehalem Tasting Room Skycam out there in Sherwood. Let's bring Chris McGinnis into the mix. He's standing by in the Weather Center. So, Chris, like we just saw, picture perfect day so far. How long, I should say, is
we
this
say this
nice
every
weather
day.
going to
last?
last?
Like a painting. It really does look
What's
like a
that?
painting. We say this every day. It looks like a painting. And there it is. All right, let's get you out a look right now at the cloud cover that has broken up really, really nicely here across the region. For all except the north coast here, Astoria, and then heading up towards the Long Beach Peninsula, we still have some clouds for you folks, but the rest of us are pretty well cleared out. There are still some high clouds across eastern Oregon as well. All right, there's the beach, the central Oregon coast right now, clearing nicely. There's Lincoln City. Here's downtown Portland. We still have a little bit of cloud cover up against the Cascades, but again, the sky more clear now than certainly than it was this morning, and it's also cooler now than it was 24 hours ago. How about 65 last check at the airport? Let's take you out to the Dalles. I'm taking you here because A, it's warmer, but also it's really breezy. Right now, the winds are gusting to nearly 40 miles an hour in the Dalles. I'll get into that more coming up with our full weather segment in a second, but there is some fire weather concern out there. 72 now in Hillsborough, the big picture across the state. Pendleton knocking on the door of 90 already. Baker City at 85. The plan for the rest of the day here in Portland. Are you ready for this? We may not actually get out of the 70s today. After 3 days in the 90s or near, we were 89 yesterday. So a nice cool down with some sunshine, a little bit of a northwest breeze today. Looks like a delightful finish to our Wednesday. And a holiday weekend forecast that's pretty hard to beat. More on that coming up in just a few minutes.
All right, thank you, Chris. New here at noon, Oregon Governor Tina Kotek is taking a stand against cell phone use in the classroom. She's using an executive order to ban phones in classrooms across the state from kindergarten through high school. The governor says she's making the move to protect student mental health and also to help boost academic success. State lawmakers tried to pass a bill on this during the legislative session, but it failed. So the governor took matters into her own hands.
It's really important to protect our students, and all the research is showing that the mental health needs of our students are being impacted by the constant use of cell phones.
Individual school districts have until October 31st to establish a policy that prohibits cell phone use, and all policies have to be in full effect by January 1st. Possible exceptions to the ban include special medical needs and students with disabilities. An asylum seeker detained by ICE outside a downtown Portland courtroom last month is set to be released. A federal judge ruled there was no legal basis for detaining him in the first place. The 24-year-old from Mexico had been living in Newport. Officers arrested him on June 5th after he showed up for an immigration hearing downtown. His attorneys say he had no criminal history and followed all the necessary requirements since first applying for asylum protection here in the U.S. He was also issued work authorization the day before his arrest.
Individuals seeking safety in this country are allowed to lawfully do that, and they are going through a process and being detained in this case even despite following every single rule. It's really important that we understand the humanity behind these sweeping statistics and understand how it is the government, not these individuals, who is taking unlawful action here.
He was taken to the ICE facility in Tacoma after his arrest, and it's still not clear if he's been released from there yet.